Welcome back to Echoes of Trust and Betrayal. Usually, we talk about the stabs in the back from strangers or the lies of lovers, but today we enter the most sacred space of all, the family home, to witness a betrayal that began before I could even walk. The day I learned my mother had given my entire inheritance to my brother, something inside me didn't just break, it collapsed. It wasn't just about the money, it was the sudden, violent realization that I had spent 30 years trying to earn a love that was never meant for me. My name is Valrice Brown, and this is the story of how a mother's strength became a daughter's prison. It's for anyone who was ever called the responsible one as an excuse for being the neglected one, because sometimes the person who teaches you how to love is also the one who teaches you exactly how to survive without it. I thought my loyalty was a bridge. I didn't realize my mother was using it as a doormat. This is the story of the house on Magnolia Street and the moment the steady star finally decided to stop burning for people who only appreciated the light but never the heat. The house on Magnolia Street was a masterclass in the art of the unspoken. It was a modest 3-bedroom ranch with siding that had faded from cream to a tired eggshell. But inside, the atmosphere was dictated by a complex, invisible hierarchy. My mother, Hyacinth Brown, was the undisputed architect of this world. After my father, Raymond, passed away from a sudden, heart-shattering attack when I was 15, the house became a fortress of survival. But in a fortress, resources are rationed, and I learned very quickly that I was the one expected to do the rationing, so that my brother, Justin, could feast. I remember the exact moment the golden child dynamic shifted from a subtle preference to a survival strategy. It was a Tuesday evening, 3 months after the funeral. The house still smelled like the sympathy casseroles neighbors had dropped off, heavy, starchy things that tasted like pity. My mother was sitting at the small oak table, a mountain of bills spread before her like a map of a war zone she was losing. I walked in, dropped my school bag, and instinctively started clearing the crusty dishes Justin had left in the sink. He was 3 years younger than me, but at 12, he was already being treated like a prince in exile. "Valrice," my mother said, her voice sounding like dry parchment. She didn't look up from the electric bill. "Justin needs those new basketball camp fees paid by Friday. He has so much potential. The coach says he could be varsity as a freshman. It's his path, you know, his way out of this grief." I looked at her, my hands submerged in soapy, lukewarm water. I had been saving my own meager babysitting money for months to join the local art collective's youth program. I wanted to paint. I wanted to find a way to put the gray, heavy feeling in my chest onto a canvas where I could control it. But before I could even open my mouth, she looked at me, really looked at me, with a gaze that was both an order and a dismissal. "You're the strong one, Valrice," she said, and even then I heard the trap snap shut. "You've always been steady. You don't need the extras to keep your head on straight. You'll be fine no matter what happens, but your brother, he's fragile. He needs the win." That was the blueprint for the next decade. Every time I reached for something, a hobby, a bit of extra attention, a moment of shared grief, my mother would use my strength as a reason to pull it away and hand it to Justin. If Justin forgot his homework, it was a mistake born of a creative mind, and she would drive it to the school in the middle of her shift. If I forgot mine, it was a failure of character, and I was told that life makes no exceptions for the lazy. I watched as the house on Magnolia Street became a museum dedicated to Justin's potential. His trophies lined the mantel, his sports gear cluttered the hallway, his moods dictated the volume of the television. I became a ghost in my own home, a silent, efficient shadow that kept the machinery running. I was the one who remembered to buy the milk, the one who scrubbed the floors until my knuckles bled, and the one who learned to swallow my own tears so I wouldn't add to the stress of the house. I believed that if I were perfect enough, quiet enough, and helpful enough, eventually the strength she praised would be rewarded with the love I actually craved. I didn't realize that in my mother's eyes, my strength didn't earn me love, it earned me more work. I was the steady star, the one she relied on to burn long and low without needing to be refueled, while she spent every ounce of her emotional energy trying to keep Justin's flickering, selfish flame alive. By the time I graduated high school, I wasn't a person to her. I was a utility. And utilities don't need inheritances. They just need to keep working. The 3 years that separated Justin and me might as well have been 3 centuries. We lived in the same house on Magnolia Street, ate at the same chipped laminate table, and walked the same cracked sidewalk to the bus stop. But we were experiencing 2 entirely different versions of reality. My mother, Hyacinth, had a way of curating the world so that the sun always hit Justin's face while I was left to navigate the shadows. It wasn't that she was cruel in the traditional sense. She didn't scream or hit. It was a quieter, more devastating kind of neglect. The kind that tells you your needs are a burden while someone else's whims are a priority. I remember the year Justin turned 15. He wanted to go to an elite basketball camp 3 states away. It cost more than our monthly mortgage, but my mother didn't hesitate. She took on extra shifts at the hospital, her feet swelling until she had to soak them in Epsom salts every night just to make sure he had the latest sneakers and the registration fee. When I asked if I could take a community college course in graphic design, a skill that would actually help me get a job, she sighed that heavy, soul-crushing sigh that made me feel like I was asking for a diamond-encrusted moon. "We have to prioritize, Valrice," she'd say, her eyes already drifting toward Justin's highlight reel on the TV. "You're smart. You'll find a way to learn on your own. But Justin, he needs the structure. He needs the edge." I became the invisible architect of our survival. While Justin was out at practice or hanging with friends, I was the one who knew the exact date the property taxes were due. I was the one who figured out how to stretch a single chicken into 3 nights of meals. I was the one who sat with my mother while she cried over the credit card statements, offering her the quiet, steady strength she claimed to admire so much. I thought I was building a partnership with her. I thought my labor was a down payment on a future where she would finally look at me and say, "I see you, Valrice. I see what you've done for us." I didn't realize I was just training her to expect my silence as the default setting. The only person who truly saw the cracks in the foundation was my grandmother, Eleanor. She lived 3 towns over in a house that smelled like ginger tea and old books, a place where the air didn't feel like it was vibrating with the stress of Justin's potential. Grandma Eleanor was a small woman with eyes like flint and a heart like a furnace. She'd watch my mother dote on Justin during Sunday dinners, then pull me aside into the kitchen to help her dry the fine china. "You burn long, Valrice," she told me once, her voice a low, melodic rasp. She pressed a $10 bill into my palm, her fingers rough from a lifetime of hard work. "Don't let them blow your light out just because they're afraid of the dark. You're the steady star, the one who stays when the others run. Remember that." Grandma Eleanor was the only one who didn't buy into the "Valrice is fine" narrative. She saw the exhaustion in my eyes and the way I shrunk myself so Justin could take up more space. She knew that my mother's fairness was a moving target that always landed at Justin's feet. When she passed away when I was 28, it felt like the last light in my world had gone out. But then came the news of the trust.
Grandma Eleanor, ever the strategist, had left a modest inheritance. It wasn't millions, but to me, it was a life raft. It was a down payment on a house where no one else's trophies would line the mantel. It was the thank you I had been waiting for my entire life. The trust was simple, divided equally between Justin and me, with my mother as the executor. I remember standing in the kitchen after the funeral, watching my mother hold the legal documents. For the first time in years, I felt a spark of hope. I thought, finally, I don't have to be the strong one. Finally, there is something just for me. I didn't see the way my mother's eyes flickered toward Justin, who was already talking about a business venture he'd seen on a podcast. I didn't see the silent covenant forming in her mind, the one that decided my strength was enough of an inheritance and Justin's potential needed just one more push.
Grief has a way of blurring the edges of time. But the 3 months following Grandma Eleanor's funeral felt like a slow-motion car crash. I spent those weeks in a state of suspended animation, waiting for the official conversation that never came. In my mind, the inheritance was a sacred pact, a final message from the only woman who had truly seen me. I imagined using my half to finally kill off the student loans that had been a phantom weight on my shoulders for years, or perhaps putting a down payment on a small sunlit condo where the walls weren't thin enough to hear my mother's sighs. But at the house on Magnolia Street, the air was thick with a new kind of secrecy. Every time I brought up the trust, my mother would suddenly become the busiest woman on earth. She'd develop an intense interest in the lint on her sweater or a sudden need to reorganize the pantry. "Legal matters are complicated, Valrice," she'd say, her voice tight and dismissive. "These things take time. Accountants, lawyers, it's a process. Don't be greedy. Your grandmother's memory deserves more than you hovering over her bank account like a vulture." The word vulture stung. It was another brick in the wall she built to keep me in my place, the responsible one who shouldn't want anything for herself. So I did what I had always done. I retreated into silence. I told myself I was being patient. I told myself I was being the strong one again. But then the cracks began to appear in Justin's world. Justin, who had been between jobs for the better part of a year, suddenly started moving with the frantic, artificial energy of a man who had struck oil. First, it was the laptop, a sleek silver machine that probably cost more than my car. Then it was the clothes, designer labels that looked out of place in our modest living room. And finally, the car. He pulled into the driveway one Saturday afternoon in a late-model SUV, the engine purring with a confidence Justin never earned. "It's an investment, Valrice," he shouted over the music, his grin wide and hollow. "I'm starting a business, logistics, tech-based stuff. Mom's helping me get it off the ground. You know how it is, you have to spend money to make money." I stood on the porch, my heart cold. I looked at the car, then at the house, and then at my mother, who was standing in the doorway with a look of pure, unadulterated pride. She wasn't worried about the process or the lawyers now. She looked like she had finally won the lottery. "Isn't it wonderful?" she whispered, her hand resting on my shoulder for the first time in months. "Your brother is finally finding his footing. He just needed a little push, a little faith. He's going to make us all so proud." I wanted to ask her where the faith had come from. I wanted to ask how a man with no savings and a history of failed ventures suddenly had the capital to buy a luxury vehicle and a tech setup. But the look in her eyes stopped me.
It was a look that said she had already decided the answer, and any question I asked would be treated as an act of war. I realized then that the process wasn't taking time, the process was already complete. The inheritance wasn't sitting in a bank account waiting for a signature. It was currently parked in our driveway, leaking oil onto the pavement. The ghost of Grandma Eleanor's promise was haunting the halls of Magnolia Street, and I was the only one who could see it. Every time Justin laughed or bragged about his business, I felt a piece of my soul wither. It wasn't about the money anymore. It was about the fact that even from beyond the grave, my grandmother's attempt to help me had been intercepted and redirected into the bottomless pit of Justin's potential. I was 30 years old, and I was still the girl holding the flashlight while everyone else got to see the show.
The air in the house on Magnolia Street had become a physical weight, a suffocating mix of unspoken questions and practiced deflections. For 2 weeks, I lived like a stranger in my own skin, watching Justin parade his investments while my mother hummed a tune of manufactured peace. But the breaking point didn't come with a shout. It came with a phone call from my cousin Maribel. "Valeris," she had said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, "I saw Justin's new setup on social media. That's a lot of equipment. I guess your mom finally released the trust funds. It's about time you got your share of Grandma's peace of mind." The silence on my end of the line was so long, Maribel asked if I was still there. I wasn't. I was back in that kitchen, looking at the dent in the linoleum and the faded wallpaper, realizing that the process I'd been told to respect was actually a heist. I drove to Magnolia Street that evening without calling. I didn't want to give them time to rehearse. When I walked through the door, the smell of roasted chicken, Justin's favorite, hit me like a slap. My mother was at the stove, the picture of domestic resilience. "What are you doing here, Valeris? You look like you've seen a ghost," she said, not even turning around. "I have," I said, my voice sounding like it belonged to someone else, someone colder, someone tired of being the strong one. "I saw the ghost of Grandma Eleanor's trust. Maribel thinks I've been paid, Mom. She thinks the complicated legal matters are over." The clatter of the spatula hitting the pan was the only sound in the room. My mother turned slowly, her face shifting from surprise to that familiar, weary authority she used to silence me since I was 6. Justin, who had been raiding the fridge, froze with a soda in his hand. "Maribel should mind her own business," my mother snapped. "I told you I am handling it." "Handled how?" I stepped further into the kitchen, the space feeling smaller with every breath. "Justin has a new car. He has a $5,000 computer. He's investing in a business he can't even explain. Where did that money come from, Mom? Because I know his savings account was an empty shell." Silence stretched between us, thick and jagged. Justin looked at the floor, picking at the label of his soda. Finally, my mother drew herself up to her full height, her eyes hardening into flint. "I made a decision," she said, her voice dropping into a low, dangerous register. "A decision that was best for this family. Justin was at a crossroads, Valeris. He needed a foundation. He needed someone to believe in him before the world chewed him up. I used the trust to give him that chance." "You used the trust?" I whispered, the words tasting like ash. "You used my half, the money Grandma specifically left for both of us?"
"You don't need that kind of money right now," she shouted, her composure finally fracturing. "You've always been the responsible one. You have a steady job. You manage your bills. You don't have children to worry about. You've always been fine. But your brother, he needed this. Opportunity doesn't wait for fairness, Valeris. I invested in his future because I'm his mother and I know what he's capable of." "And what am I capable of?" I asked, my voice trembling with 30 years of repressed hurt. "Am I only capable of being the person you steal from to fix his mistakes? That money wasn't yours to give, Mom. It was Grandma's last gift to me. It was my chance to breathe, to buy a home, to finally stop being the strong one for 5 minutes." "It's not like I stole it," Justin muttered from the corner, finally finding his voice. "It's an investment. I'm going to pay you back once the logistics company takes off. It's for the whole family, Valeris. Don't be so selfish." "Selfish," I laughed, a sharp, bitter sound that echoed off the thin walls. "I've spent 15 years being the shadow in this house so you could have the light. I've paid the bills you forgot and cleaned the messes you made. And now, the one time the universe tried to give me something back, you both reached out and snatched it before it even hit my hand." I looked at my mother, searching for a glimmer of remorse, a hint of the woman who used to tuck me in, but all I saw was a woman who decided a long time ago that my worth was measured only by how much I could endure. The steady star wasn't a compliment, it was a life sentence. And as I stood in that flickering fluorescent light, I realized the bridge of loyalty I'd been building for decades didn't lead to her heart. It led to a dead end.
The air in the kitchen didn't just feel heavy, it felt toxic. It was the kind of atmosphere where every word spoken was a brick being added to a wall that had been under construction since I was 5 years old. My mother, Hyacinth, didn't look like a woman who had just admitted to a legal and moral transgression. She looked like a martyr. She sat down at the table, smoothing her apron with a rhythmic, mechanical motion that set my teeth on edge. "You've always been jealous of your brother, Valrice," she said, her voice dropping into a calm, condescending tone that was somehow worse than her shouting. "Ever since he was a baby, you've looked at him like he was taking something from you. But you don't understand the burden of being a mother. You don't understand what it's like to see one child who is a rock and another who is a sail. Rocks don't need help staying put. Sails need wind, or they just hang there, useless." "I'm not a rock, Mom," I whispered, my voice cracking. "I'm a person, and you didn't give him wind, you stripped the lead off my roof to build him a boat." She ignored me, caught in the momentum of her own practiced narrative. "Justin has a vision. He has this logistics idea. He's explained it to me a dozen times. It's brilliant, really. He just needed the capital to buy the equipment, to get the licensing, to look like a professional so people would take him seriously. If I had split that money, neither of you would have had enough to do anything real. By giving it all to him, I've secured a future for this entire family. When he's successful, he'll take care of you. He'll take care of me. It's an investment in our collective bloodline." I looked at Justin. He was leaning against the refrigerator, buffing a smudge off his new smartphone with the hem of his designer t-shirt. He wouldn't look at me. He didn't look like a man burdened by the weight of a family investment. He looked like a boy who had finally found a way to get what he wanted without having to work for it. "He's 30 years old, Mom," I said, the bitterness finally overflowing. "He's had 10 visions in the last 5 years. He had the car detailing business that lasted 3 weeks. He had the crypto trading phase that cost you 2 months of mortgage payments. He had the influencer dream that required $1,000 in camera gear that's currently gathering dust in the garage. Why is this the one that's worth my inheritance?" Because I say it is, she barked, her hand slamming onto the table. The sound echoed through the thin walls, a sharp punctuation mark to her authority. I am the executor. The law gives me the right to distribute those funds as I see fit for the benefit of the heirs, and I decided that the benefit was keeping your brother from falling into another depression, from feeling like a failure. You, Valerice, you're a success story. You have your little apartment, your little car, your little job. You don't need Grandma's money to survive. He does. The word little felt like a series of small, precise cuts. My life, which I had built with sweat and overtime and missed meals, was being dismissed as a hobby, while Justin's incompetence was being rebranded as a tragic necessity. I realized then that my mother didn't see my independence as an achievement. She saw it as a convenience. It made it easier for her to ignore me. My stability was her permission to be reckless with my brother. You didn't invest in a business, Mom, I said, standing up, my legs feeling like lead. You bought a temporary peace in this house. You bought another 6 months of not having to deal with Justin's tantrums or his failures. You didn't do this for the family, Mom. You did it for yourself, so you wouldn't have to feel like a bad mother for raising a son who can't stand on his own 2 feet. But you did it by being a terrible mother to the daughter who never asked you for anything. I walked toward the door, the smell of the roasted chicken now making me nauseous. Behind me, I heard her voice, sharp and cold, reaching out to pull me back into the role I was born to play. You're being dramatic, Valerice. You'll see, in a year when Justin is running things, you'll be thanking me for having the vision you lack. I didn't turn around. I didn't say goodbye. I walked out into the cool night air of Magnolia Street, the steady star finally realizing that the only thing my light was doing was making it easier for them to rob me blind. The justification was over. The lie was exposed. And for the first time in my life, the silence of the night felt like the beginning of an answer.
Driving away from Magnolia Street that night felt like shedding a skin that had grown too tight. The hum of the tires on the asphalt was the only thing filling the void where my mother's justifications and Justin's excuses used to live. I didn't go home and cry, not yet. I went home and sat in the dark of my little apartment, as my mother had called it, and listened to the silence. For 30 years I had been terrified of this silence. I thought if I stopped moving, stopped fixing, and stopped being the rock, the world would fall apart. But as the clock on my wall ticked toward midnight, the ceiling didn't cave in. The floor stayed solid beneath my feet. The only thing that had fallen apart was the illusion of my place in that family. The next few weeks were a study in the weight of a different kind of silence, the silence of withdrawal. Usually, I was the one who initiated the check-in calls. I was the one who asked if the mortgage was paid, if the lawn was mowed, or if Justin had finally gone to that job interview. I was the emotional glue of Magnolia Street, and I realized that by simply stopping, I was pulling the rug out from under a dynamic that relied on my participation. My phone became a battlefield of digital guilt. "Valerice, your brother is asking if you have that old crock-pot. He needs it for his office lunches." "Valerice, don't be childish. We're having Sunday dinner. I expect you there at 5. "Valerice, are you really going to let money come between us? Family is more important than a bank account." I read the messages, but I didn't reply. Each one felt like a hook designed to drag me back into the murky waters of their dysfunction. I realized that my mother wasn't reaching out because she missed me. She was reaching out because the rock had moved and the sail was starting to flap aimlessly in the wind. Without me to vent to, without me to blame for Justin's inevitable stumbles, she was forced to face the reality of the son she had created. The silence was agonizing. It felt like a physical pressure in my chest, a phantom limb that kept reaching for a phone that stayed dark. I had been the responsible one for so long that doing nothing felt like a crime. I had to relearn how to exist without the constant background noise of someone else's crisis. I spent my evenings in my sketchbook, finally letting the gray, heavy feelings out. I drew Magnolia Street, but I drew it from a distance, a small, flickering house in a vast, dark forest. I realized that my grandmother was right. I did burn long, but I didn't have to burn for them. The weight of the silence also brought clarity. I began to look at my finances not as a little life, but as a hard-won victory. Every dollar in my savings was a dollar I had earned without stealing from someone else's future. Every piece of furniture in my home was a testament to my own resilience. I started to see that my mother's strength was actually a form of cowardice, the cowardice of a woman who couldn't say no to a spoiled son, so she said no to a loyal daughter instead. By the end of the first month, the frantic messages from Magnolia Street slowed down. The emergency calls became less frequent. I was being replaced by a new narrative. I was now the ungrateful daughter. I was the one who turned her back on family over a few dollars. I was the villain in the story they told themselves to keep the lie alive. And for the first time in my life, I realized that being the villain in their story was the only way I could be the hero in my own. The silence wasn't a void, it was a boundary. And inside that boundary, the steady star was finally starting to find its own orbit.
Rebellion isn't always a riot. Sometimes it's a ledger. For me, the quiet rebellion began with a spreadsheet and a stopwatch. If my mother viewed my life as little, then I was going to make that little life an impenetrable fortress. I took a second job doing freelance design work for a local firm, working from 6 p.m. until my eyes burned at midnight. I cut every unnecessary expense. No more streaming services, no more takeout, no more just because purchases. Every dollar I saved wasn't just currency, it was a brick. I was rebuilding the inheritance they had stolen, cent by agonizing cent. The steady star was no longer burning for the house on Magnolia Street. I was burning for myself. I found a strange, cold comfort in the math of my independence. I tracked my savings with a religious fervor, watching the numbers climb as I reclaimed the agency that had been stripped from me in that kitchen. I realized that for 30 years I had been an unpaid employee of my family's dysfunction. I had been the therapist, the financier, the maid, and the scapegoat. By resigning from those roles, I suddenly had a massive surplus of time and energy. I used that energy to sharpen my professional edges. I signed up for the certifications my mother had once called hobbies. I stayed late at my primary job, taking on the projects everyone else was too tired to handle. I became the person who couldn't be ignored, the one whose reliability was no longer a tool for my mother to exploit, but a weapon for my own advancement. My coworkers started to notice a change, a hardness in my jaw, a new clarity in my voice. I wasn't the sweet girl anymore. I was the woman who knew exactly what she was worth because she had seen the receipt for how much it cost to be undervalued. The rebellion also took place in the small spaces of my daily life. I stopped answering emergency texts that weren't actually emergencies. When Justin messaged me asking for the login to my Netflix account because he didn't want to add another bill to the business, I didn't ignore it.
I changed the password. When my mother called to complain that the lawn was overgrown and your brother is so busy with the logistics company, I didn't offer to go over with the mower. I gave her the number of a local landscaping service and hung up. It felt like a betrayal at first, that old programmed guilt clawing at my throat. I had been trained to feel like a criminal for having boundaries. But every time I said no, the air in my apartment felt a little cleaner. I was learning that words family are often used by people who want to break the rules without facing the consequences. By refusing to play, I was forcing them to live in the world they had created. I started a new ritual. Every Friday night, after finishing my freelance work, I would sit with a cup of tea and look at my bank statement. I would see the Grandma Eleanor Fund, the account I had opened to replace what was lost. It was growing. It wasn't just a number. It was my proof. It was the physical evidence that my mother was wrong. I wasn't a rock that didn't need help. I was a mountain that was tired of being mined. The quiet rebellion was working. I was building a life that didn't require anyone's permission to exist. And for the first time, the future didn't look like a debt. It looked like an investment I was finally making in myself.
Gravity is a patient force. You can fight it for a while with illusions and borrowed capital, but eventually the weight of reality pulls everything down to earth. For 2 years, the golden vision of Justin's logistics company had been the shield my mother used to deflect my anger. It was her proof that she was right and I was just jealous. But a business built on stolen soil and a foundation of entitlement cannot survive a storm. And in the second year, the storm finally arrived. I heard about the collapse in fragments. First, it was a cryptic post from Justin about disloyal partners and market volatility. Then it was a call from a frantic Maribel who had heard that the fancy SUV had been repossessed from the driveway on Magnolia Street in the middle of the night. The logistics solutions empire hadn't been defeated by a competitor. It had been hollowed out from the inside by the same traits my mother had spent 30 years nurturing in him: laziness, arrogance, and the belief that someone else would always be there to catch him. He had spent the inheritance on the trappings of success, the office, the tech, the car, but he hadn't spent a dime on the work of success. He hadn't managed the books. He'd treated the company account like a personal ATM. And when the bills for the high-end software and the office lease finally came due, there was no steady star to quietly pay them in the background. The silence from Magnolia Street was broken one Tuesday evening by a phone call that lasted 10 minutes, the exact length of time it took for my mother's pride to finally shatter. "Valerice," she sobbed, her voice sounding older, thinner, and stripped of its usual authority. "It's gone. Everything is gone. The office is locked, the equipment is being seized, and Justin, he's in a dark place. He won't come out of his room. He says he's a failure, and I don't know how to help him. We're behind on the mortgage again, and the bank, they're sending letters." I sat at my desk in my little apartment, looking at the spreadsheet of my own savings. I felt a flicker of the old Valerice, the one who would have dropped everything, grabbed her purse, and rushed over to Magnolia Street to solve the unsolvable. I felt the phantom itch to be the hero, to be the one who saves the day and finally earns the thank you that was always just out of reach. But then I looked at the framed note from Grandma Eleanor on my wall. "You burn long." "I'm sorry to hear that, Mom," I said, my voice steady, devoid of the jagged edge of spite I thought I would feel. "I truly am. I hope Justin finds a way to figure it out." "Figure it out?" she gasped, her voice rising in a familiar, sharp pitch.
"Valerice, did you hear me? We're losing the house. Your brother is devastated. You have that savings. I know you've been working those extra jobs. Surely you can't just sit there while your family drowns. You're the strong one. You've always been the one we could count on." "No, Mom," I said, and the word felt like a physical release. "I'm not the one you count on. I'm the one you used. You didn't invest in a business, you gambled with my life. And now that the bet has failed, you're asking me to pay the debt for a game I never agreed to play. I won't do it. I won't set myself on fire again just to keep the two of you warm." The silence on the other end of the line was absolute. It was the silence of a woman who had finally run out of justifications. There was no mention of the trust, no apology for the theft, and no recognition of the 2 years of silence I had endured. There was only the demand for more sacrifice. "You're really going to turn your back on your own blood?" she whispered, her voice cold with a new kind of betrayal. "My blood turned its back on me the day it decided my future was worth less than Justin's comfort. I'm not turning my back on you, Mom. I'm just finally facing the front of my own life." I hung up. I didn't cry. I didn't check the news. I just went back to my sketchbook. The golden vision had collapsed, but for the first time in my life, I wasn't buried under the rubble. I was standing outside the fence, watching the dust settle, finally understanding that some structures are meant to fall so that something real can finally be built in their place.
The fallout from the phone call was a silent, radioactive winter. I didn't go to Magnolia Street for Sunday dinner, and for the first time in 30 years, I didn't feel the phantom itch of guilt. I had finally realized that family isn't a blood type, it's a behavior. If your blood is constantly draining you to keep itself warm, it's not a connection, it's a parasite. I spent the next 6 months building a new kind of home. It wasn't made of the faded wallpaper and thin walls of my childhood, but of the people who saw me when I wasn't doing anything for them. I started hosting small dinners in my apartment, my little sanctuary. I invited Maribel, who had been the one to tell me the truth when my own mother wouldn't. I invited Sarah, my mentor from the design firm, who had taught me that my reliability was a professional asset, not a personal weakness. We sat around my small circular table, and for the first time, the conversation wasn't a minefield. No one was asking me to fix a credit score. No one was bragging about a vision funded by someone else's labor. We talked about books, about the projects we were proud of, and about the futures we were actually building with our own hands. I realized that I had spent my entire life starving for a seat at a table that was never set for me, while there was a whole world of people waiting to break bread with the woman I actually was, not the rock I was forced to be. "You look different, Valerice," Maribel said one evening, swirling the wine in her glass. "You don't look like you're waiting for a fire alarm to go off anymore." I smiled, and it felt real, not the practiced, polite mask I wore at Magnolia Street. I think I finally realized that I'm not the fire department, and I'm definitely not the insurance policy. The new definition of family also meant reclaiming the memory of Grandma Eleanor. I stopped seeing her inheritance as a lost sum of money and started seeing it as a successful delivery of her final message. She hadn't just left me money, she had left me the catalyst for my freedom. If the money hadn't been stolen, I might have stayed in that cycle of the strong one for another decade, waiting for a thank you that would never be enough. The betrayal was the cold water that finally woke me up. I bought a small townhouse in a neighborhood filled with trees that actually bloomed in the spring. It was a stretch, and I had to use every penny of the Grandma Eleanor fund I had rebuilt myself, but the moment I turned the key in the lock, I knew I was home. There was no golden child bedroom. There was no shrine to a son's potential. There was just a studio for my art, a kitchen that smelled like my favorite coffee, and a living room where the only echoes were the ones I chose to keep. I had traded a stolen inheritance for a self-made kingdom, and for the first time in my life, the golden star wasn't burning for a house on Magnolia Street. It was finally, beautifully, burning for me.
Forgiveness is often sold as a gift you give to others to set yourself free. But in the quiet hours of my new life, I've learned that the truest, most radical form of forgiveness is the one you give to yourself. I had to sit in the silence and manually forgive the 15-year-old girl who thought she could earn her mother's love by scrubbing floors until her knuckles bled. I had to forgive the 25-year-old woman who let her brother treat her like a safety net, believing that if she just held the net tight enough, someone would eventually thank her for the strain on her arms. And most importantly, I had to forgive the version of me that felt like a criminal for finally saying no. The house on Magnolia Street still stands, but it is no longer my North Star. It has been stripped of its power to command my guilt. I heard through the family grapevine that the inevitable finally happened. The golden vision didn't just fail, it vanished. My mother had to downsize, moving into a cramped apartment after the bank moved in on the mortgage she couldn't pay without my steady contributions. Justin is back to finding himself, a cycle of reinventing his own incompetence that I suspect will continue as long as there is a single person left to buy into his illusions. I don't wish them ill, but I no longer wish them my life. I realize that my mother's strength was actually a profound tragedy. She was a woman so terrified of her son's failure that she sacrificed the only child who was actually succeeding. She didn't just give Justin my money, she gave him my peace, my youth, and my trust, and she did it all while calling me the strong one to keep me from screaming. The legacy of the steady star isn't about endurance anymore. It's about the holy power of boundaries. It's about knowing that my light is a finite resource, not a public utility that belongs to everyone with my last name. I still burn long, just as Grandma Eleanor promised, but I burn for the things that actually grow in the light. My thriving career, the art that finally has a place to breathe, and the family of choice I've built with people who know that family is a verb, not a hostage situation. I still keep a small, faded Polaroid of the house on Magnolia Street tucked away in the back of a desk drawer. I don't look at it with anger anymore, and I don't look at it with longing. I look at it as a map of a territory I have successfully crossed. I lost an inheritance, yes. I lost a mother's approval. I lost the brother I thought I had. But in the vacuum they left behind, I found something that no lawyer could draft and no executor could steal. A life that no one else controls. I am no longer the girl holding the flashlight for everyone else's show. I am the architect, the builder, and the sole owner of the light. And for the first time in 30 years, the house is finally, perfectly quiet.
Thank you for joining us on this journey on Echoes of Trust and Betrayal. Valerice's story is a powerful reminder that the people who deny you fairness are almost always the ones who expect you to keep offering loyalty. But healing doesn't begin with an apology you'll never get. It begins the moment you realize you were never asking for too much. You were simply asking the wrong people. If you've ever been the strong one who was overlooked, or if you've had to walk away from a family that only saw you as a resource to be mined, we want to hear your story in the comments. Your value does not decrease just because someone failed to recognize it. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more stories of resilience and truth. Until next time, remember, Once you stop knocking on closed doors, you finally discover just how many were always meant to open for you.